Hello and welcome to Running Your Stories. This is episode 34 where we're going to introduce Anna Troup. Anna has had an absolutely amazing 12 months. They include being First Lady on the Oner, an 83-mile ultra, being First Lady on Wendover Woods 100, being First Lady on Lakeland 100, taking her daughter Millie around Javenlina Jundred route, then going on to Exodus across the Brecon Beacons and finishing First Lady, second overall on that. And then last weekend running in Cornwall on the Arc of Attrition and finishing First Lady on that. And the phenomenal thing about Anna's story is not just these amazing results on tough ultras, but also the learning that's gone on along the way. We get into a little of that with Anna about what's made the difference. Why is it that she's now smashing these races? So please listen in, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. Thanks, Anna, for coming along to talk about the amazing year that you've had. And
no problem.
I'm going to let you do most of the talking about it because I want to listen and ask questions. So. So where do we start with this year? Is this because I guess it's not the 2019 calendar year, but the what we're talking about.
It's the Anna Troup birthday year, which starts in the March. Yeah, that's where I started it.
Yep. Okay, so from March 2019.
Yes.
So come on then, are you gonna walk me through it?
So from March 2019, so we'd done the Arc at the very beginning of the year, which is pre-March 2019. And then really the year was very much focused on getting the children, Millie and Bella, ready for their Javenlina Jundred attempt. So right from the beginning of the year, we'd started to do a lot of, I suppose, extra miles with them. So I'd go training and then I'd come back and then I'd take them out for their training runs or walks or hikes or whatever it was. And family holidays and weekends started to be built around slowly building up their training for their 100 miles at the end of the year. So I suppose come March, my mileage had already started to move up in that year from where it might have been in the previous year.
Yeah.
And I suppose the first event that Richard and I did was the Oner, which takes place in April, which is the 83 miles brutal events course along the Jurassic coast. We'd done it the year before as well. We wanted to go and do a better time, and it really was a sort of let's investigate and see where our fitness is. We're not, as you know, particularly structured in our racing and training, and it was a case of, there's still some places left, let's go and do it. And it happened to be one of those days where it was a very runnable day. It was a really great day out, so we did a very fast first half. I think we did the first marathon in 3:45. It was that sort of runnable, and then we carried on as normal. I got very sick. We hit lots and lots of steps at the end, and there are lots and lots of steps towards that back end of the Jurassic Coast path as you head towards Durdle Door and Lulworth Cove. And I suppose neither of us had legs conditioned for that. So it was a pretty brutal last 10 miles, but we still came in well ahead of the time the previous year. And I think I was fourth overall and first lady by quite a chunk. So it was a big improvement on the previous year. And I think that gave us confidence that the training was working, but we were quite aware that the leg conditioning needed to now happen because it was pretty unpleasant, sore quads. And so the next race in the calendar was the UTS100. We'd done the 50 the previous year, and I really wanted to move up to the 100. As you know from talking to Richard, his big focus last year was always about doing the Tour de France, Le Loop. And so he, after the Oner, pretty much took himself out of running and started to go onto the bike. So I was very much on my own. And that was a really new thing for me, having to focus and train on my own. So when it came to UTS100, we agreed that he would come and do some of the overnight really sort of interesting, gnarly section. I mean, I don't mind being up on top of mountains, but I'd much rather be up on top of mountains in the middle of the night with someone, particularly when it's quite tricky terrain, and it was really quite tricky terrain. I'm not great at ridges and exposure, and I much rather do that if there's someone else around. So he came up with me for the night section, but my knees were so bad during that night section that there were tears as I was sort of coming down, and it wasn't tears from not being able to do it. It was actual pain, and I was really worried that I was doing lasting damage. I think there's no other way I can describe it. It was searing agony, and I could run, but I physically couldn't go down hills, and big steps down rock were just really, really sore. So we got to the halfway point, which is actually effectively back at the start, which makes it a very easy place to make a decision that this isn't wise. It was a really hard decision. I mean, none of us like to drop out of any race. But the first time ever, I felt that I was potentially doing myself lasting damage. I was really nervous that the cartilage in my knees had gone, and maybe it was time that I sought a proper professional opinion. So I stopped. We had a great second day out there supporting the 50s. We had friends racing, and so we had a really good day out there. But I came back and I went to the physio, and I thought probably that was going to be the end of my racing year, if I'm honest, or at least it was going to have to be the start of a flatter racing year if I could get my knees back. A trip to the physio said he was quite unsure as to what it was. He didn't think it was cartilage, but he really felt that it was time to get some proper surgical help, proper MRIs, and get an orthopod involved, which we did. He recommended a great orthopod, who, having looked at the MRI, said, well, they look like old lady knees, but that's fine. And I was like, okay, old lady knees, I can deal with that. And he said, as far as I can tell, there's no issue with cartilage, and he felt that the patella and the tendons were, just hugely inflamed. He said, look, you've got chronic knee tendonitis, and one side is very bruised, and you've got bad bone bruising. But he said, look, if you want to carry on running, there's no problem with that. And actually what his advice was, and I followed it to start with, it was carry on running, slightly knock back the mileage, try and knock out a little bit of the ups and downs for the next couple of months. If you want to race, in the 3 days up to a race, I want you to take Nurofen, ibuprofen, or any other, NSAID, all the things you're not meant to take. He said, you don't need to take any during the race, but race and then go back on it and try and bring the inflammation back down. And he said, I want you to go back to the physio, and I want you to start rehab with the physio. Now, and that's exactly what we did. So that was May. Come June, I'd already committed to a friend to help them on their Bob Graham round. And Richard was, I'm absolutely not doing the overnight section. I'm not risking injury. I've got my Tour de France, so you'll have to do the chunk of it, Anna. So I found myself doing 4 legs of a Bob Graham not that long after this diagnosis. And I was thinking this could get one of two ways. As it went, I just got horribly sick as normal, and my knees actually were fine, and the whole 3 days of Nurofen seemed to be making quite a big difference. And I think by then just some of the basic physio was starting to play in, so that was really positive. After that Bob Graham, the next thing up was one of the Centurion running crowd, a lady called Zoe Norman, encouraged me to do the Wendover Woods 100. And again, you can tell there's no structure to this race calendar. This was absolutely to be my next race. It was meant to be the Lakeland 100. But it seemed like a good idea. I'd have to do it without Richard. He was away in France. The children were away. I thought, well, maybe I should just go and do it. It's looped. What's the worst thing that can happen? I'll be passing the car every 10 miles. I can just stop. So I went and did Wendover Woods. And actually, again, my knees on my 3 days of Nurofen, come off it for racing, come back on it for a few days afterwards, were absolutely brilliant. So, and I got 6,000 meters of climbing in, which made me feel much more positive for Lakeland. I mean, the only downside of this was it was 2 weeks before the Lakeland 100, which is probably not the perfect recovery period for them going out and doing a Lakeland 100, but it just seemed the right thing to do. So by the time we turned up to Lakeland with the children, I'd won the Wendover Woods 100. I come second overall. So, I felt like between the Oner and Wendover and my knees being better, I'd had a brilliant year. I was like, this is great. So when I came to Lakeland, I had absolutely no idea that things would go well. And in fact, as you know, Kev, when I saw you, we were just pootling along. Sharon Law had come past us. Sabrina Vergy was well up the road somewhere. And we were just having, as you know, I had a really tricky night section where I did an awful lot of walking, and a lot of sleeping on my feet. And then ultimately, I suppose, that became a real learning because we got to Delmain. I managed to get some food down. And then the second half was really, really strong. And Sabrina obviously was injured, and Sharon, come 70 or 80 miles, was feeling, in a difficult patch. And it was the win that I never ever expected to happen. And I'm actually quite looking forward to going back again this year, because I think if we can sort out that middle night section, there's a couple of hours to come off somewhere. So, so again, that was a really positive experience. But I think my takeaway from that was I really need to A, sort out my eating, but B, focus on the second half of the race, because I think, but when I sat in Dalemain with 50 miles gone, there was absolutely no chance in my head that I was doing anything other than aiming to finish. There was no thoughts of podiums. There was just no thinking whatsoever apart from let's get over the line. That was really, really, that was for me the key piece at that point. But getting some food down and just seeing how things change when the sun comes up and you just keep pootling on, and actually your whole mindset can change. It's a massive learning. I think I now know I have to hit 30 miles and just have running in my legs, because if I can get there, there's an awful lot that can happen.
Yeah, just with regards to the like you're saying you got into Dalemain, and you were thinking that you've got no chance of sort of placing at that point, or certainly not of winning it. Do you find that you then run better once you've put yourself into that mindset of saying, I'm kind of taking the pressure off and I'm going to maybe enjoy this and just see what I can do? Is that what's making the difference, do you think?
I mean, I think taking the pressure off has definitely helped. And since Lakeland, and there's been a real focus for me on just enjoying these races and not worrying about where I come or how it goes, or because actually really it doesn't matter. What's most important is having a fantastic day, meeting people, and just really enjoying the adventure. And I think that mindset has definitely that's definitely changed. And to be honest, when you do take the front, and it happens in Lakeland with about 20 miles to go, and it happened at the Arc the weekend again with whatever 25 30 miles to go, whatever it was, you do feel like you're running scared. You've got someone behind you and you're constantly thinking, could they catch me? How fast do I have to go? How fast would they have to go? How many more minutes per mile would they have to run for them to make up this gap? And it's a very different mindset to just running free and just enjoying it. So I think you're right. I think that mindset makes a difference. But I think it's actually just let's just enjoy the process, whatever that brings. That's been the biggest change.
Yeah. So after Lakeland, you said you're focusing on the eating, and you're focusing on having a good second half to the race.
Yes.
And are we talking about Arc next, or a quick mention of popping over to do Javelina? I guess TDS as well in between.
Well, yeah. So yes. Before that, we were back to sort of training children again, and we had the UTMB hike back to back for 4 days with the girls, and then 3 days after that, we were racing TDS. So it was a pretty big block not long after Lakeland. Most of it with a very heavy big backpack on, because the girls really carried all their clothes, so they just had to walk with their food and a little bit of drink, but nothing else each day, to make sure that they weren't weighed down. And the packs were pretty heavy. They'd taken most of their toiletries. They seemed to have taken every piece of clothing they might possibly want to wear. So Richard and I had seriously heavy packs. But I do think that heavy pack hiking makes a big difference to leg strength ultimately. So, and also for me, I'm not brilliant at altitude. I think it got me used to being back up at altitude in time for TDS. So I hit the start line of TDS with no expectations, just really excited to hit the start line, because the previous year I'd gone to the start line and been too sick to start. So for me, this was just like, right, I'm off. This is great. We knew it was a really difficult course. And because we knew they'd made the course so much more difficult, we really focused on making sure we didn't go off too hard in that first half. So again, we took it steady. We were eating, and quite early on, we bumped into Sophie Grant, and I just had a really lovely time getting to know Sophie, doing some fantastic downhills with her, following her, because she's so infinitely much better at that than I am. I'm really not a good downhiller, and she's fabulous. So just following her. So I learned a lot just racing in the TDS, and obviously falling was disappointing. It was really disappointing, because at the time I was racing well, but it was just one of those things. But then I had that, oh my goodness, I've now really badly sprained my ankle, and in not so many weeks I've got to be mum and getting Millie round Javelina, so I now need to get my ankle sorted before doing 100 miles in October. So there wasn't a lot of time to feel too sad about TDS. It was like, okay, that was great, now let's move on and let's sort this ankle out. So I and you know what bad ankles are like. You've just had it from the spine. It's a case of gently does it, but actually no, I'd really like to get out there and do something. So it's doing it within the confines of what your ankle can cope with. And what I found was, as long as I was walking, it was okay quite quickly. I probably did too much too soon, but I got myself sort of jogging, running as fast as I could, and then got myself in a position where I could at least take Millie out on her last few big training outings before we did Javelina. And then Javelina was just wonderful. It was just wonderful passing the baton on to Millie, seeing her success. We were really disappointed Bella couldn't be with us because obviously she was sick, but it was just fantastic watching someone else complete 100 miles and realizing and remembering what it feels like to do that first 100, because it is just such an amazing achievement. And when you're doing them more regularly, you're on the start line and you're thinking about different things. Watching someone else go through that process was excellent, and then supporting her around was just really joyful. But as a result, I was going well within myself. I mean, we were going at a pace that was different to the pace that we would normally run. And I could eat, and I was really, really eating, and it was so much fun. In fact, I felt quite bad because Millie had really looked forward to this whole concept of a mobile picnic, and she was feeling so sick she would get there and look at the pizza and go, no, I can't. And I'd be looking at the pizza going, fantastic, I can, bring it on. So for the first time ever, I was able to really enjoy an aid station food, rather than looking at it thinking, oh no, can't even think about that, and getting out as fast as possible. For me, this was just genius. So after Javelina, it sort of, the penny dropped. Okay, it's time to really now start the knee weights programs, because they've been managing, and I don't want to be taking Nurofen, and I really want to be able to just use my knees for the next X number of years, and to do that I need to do the weights. So after Javelina, it was like, let's get on with the weights, and then it was right, now let's explore this idea of better pacing. Because if I can get some food down, I can go faster. And we now know that higher heart rate or going off too hard is contributing to my race breaking down in the second half, because I just haven't got any food inside me at all. So we really started a heavy weights program, and it was horrendous. It made me want to sob on a regular basis. It hurt my knees so badly that I thought they were breaking. But actually, over time, it has started to make a massive difference. Come December, we just thought maybe we'll just fit one quick race in, because it looks quite fun. It's the end of the year. Richard's back from cycling. We haven't had an adventure together in a while. And Exodus still had some places. And it was like, oh, the Brecons, 105 miles in the winter, in December. It's going to be perfect. Let's go and do it. So we thought we'd go and just have this adventure. And it really was just really exciting. It was a 7:00 start in the evening, something we hadn't done for a while. We knew we were going to mostly be in the dark for the whole of this race, because English winter, we might get 8 hours of sunshine if we were lucky, and of course, being Wales, there was no chance of sunshine. It was going to be wind, it was going to be rain, and it was all those things. So we looked at the weather forecast and we said, right, okay, the plan is let's get in before the next weather front, and that was our only plan. It was just keep moving and avoid the weather, and it was just a really great race. We went out steadily. We got in with a bunch of boys who were clearly great fell running type boys, who were able to hit the gnarly terrain and run well on the flat. But on the ups, where I'm usually quite strong, I held back and I went off heart rate, and I didn't let myself just push through them on the ups. I just actually stayed within myself. And we were eating and we were drinking all the way. I mean, there weren't that many aid stations. I think they're roughly every 20, 25 miles. But our packs were full of stuff, and I was able to keep eating and drinking. And I was really, really strong, and my knees were fine. And this was just hugely exciting. So we had a great race. I think I was second overall and first lady. And I think the next lady was some sort of 10, 15, 20 hours back. So I didn't have that sense of being chased. I really had so much time. I knew that this was going to be just fine. And actually our focus was on making sure that Richard came in second man or second equal with me. And that was the overall aim, for him to place. So we had an amazing night out and a really great race there, and it was putting everything into practice. So I think it gave me that confidence. And we finished that. We did no DOMs, straight back to weights, straight back to training, all within the week. And it was like, okay, so this is now working. And so maybe I now need to take some of the learnings from from that race, from bits of Javelina, from the second half of the Lakeland 100, and pull this all together and start looking at what is working and what is not working. And we've added into that some thinking around allowing our central nervous systems a little downtime. So actually, maybe the odd walk is not a bad thing. Maybe actually the odd 2-minute sit down in an aid station or in the back of a car or whatever is a good thing, because it allows the whole set and then go again. So that's a new area that we are experimenting with. Is there a good balance between just go and then also allowing your central nervous system just that moment to reset and start again? So I think that's a piece that in future races this year we'll be looking at. And then of course it was the ARC last week, and that was fantastic. That's where it all came together, where actually I applied some discipline off the start, which is highly unusual. I really did, after 30 minutes, think this is just too fast for me, held back, let them all go, just enjoyed the whole race. In fact, Richard's busy putting some video together of it now, and it's just really, I'd forgotten just how bad and muddy and windy it was. You can hear it and you can see it. And I was thinking, cracky. That was a really quite a tricky first 50 miles. It's the second half that's known to be tricky, but the first 50 was actually quite tricky. And it just we just ran well, and it was just really nice to see it all come together. And I really did enjoy it all. I mean, obviously the last sort of 8-10 miles you feel a bit knackered and your legs are a bit tired, but it generally there were no down moments. There were no mental down moments at all. And this week, my legs have been back to normal really, really quickly. I've been able to train normally since Wednesday. I'm, straight back to the weights and no DOMs at all. So I've become, even though I hate them, an absolute advocate for doing posterior chain weights and weights that, work the knees and the tendons around my knees, because it does seem to be working for me. Yeah. And that's a very quick resume.
Yeah. So a few things come back to. So in particular about the arc of attrition. As I mentioned to you when we've been messaging before having this chat, I was really impressed when I was dot watching, because as you say, early on you were sort of further back in the field, and then a few hours later I looked and you were just slowly but surely moving up the field, and every few hours when I looked, the gap between the first place lady and yourself was just getting smaller and getting smaller, and it just continued like that all the way through, to the point where you moved up into third, then into second, then into first, and then finished, I think it was about 2 hours ahead of second place.
Yeah.
And yeah, I as I said at the time, I was really very impressed with how well that you paced that. It looked absolutely spot on, to be honest.
Well, and I suppose there is a risk in that. People may go and you may never see them again. That is possible.
It is, but I guess first of all, you're pacing on that. Had you worked out the time you wanted to finish in, and sort of work backwards from there as to what pace you need to be running at? How did you actually go about pacing it?
We never actually, we'd looked at our time from the previous year, so we knew how fast we were running that year. But I think the problem, especially when you do some of these British ultras, is the terrain changes so much depending on the conditions, that I think it's really hard to do pacing off splits, if you like, or because so what we did was we used our heart rates, or my heart rate. So I now know roughly where it can be, and if it goes over a level, I know that at some point I'm really going to pay for that. I've got a little bit of time above that level, and by definition we all go off the start far too quickly. Looking at the pace everyone went off the start, looking at my first mile on Strava, I'm thinking, crikey, we went up a hill and we still did a 9 something. That's bonkers. I wouldn't do that in training. What was I thinking? But you have to do that, and sometimes it's to get through a gate before there's a crowd, or sometimes it's to get onto a single track. And so there are matches that you will burn at the beginning. But quite soon into it, we realised that if we stay aerobic, or if I stay aerobic, because Richard's always aerobic when he's running with me, but if I stay aerobic, it means that I am within myself. So, and I think that reduces the stress generally, because you're running within yourself. So you're able to eat and drink. You're able to enjoy the experience because you're not constantly pushing. you're not tired at the beginning, so actually there is even less stress. You can enjoy the people around you because it's the time to do that. And I think it just sets you up for a better, a better 20 or 30 hours that's coming up. I think you kind of forget when you go off a start, this is half an hour and I've got another 24 or 28 of these to go. And so when we were thinking about pacing, it was very much about what can we just keep moving at and ideally running at. Sometimes when it's not particularly runnable, we do move to a hike, and obviously the very steep hills will move to a hike. But in the Arc, and certainly when I look at some of Richard's video footage, we're running pretty much everything. Everything that we can run, we pretty much ran. And I think that's ultimately what happened in Exodus. And that's what my new aim is in terms of pacing. When I can run, let's run. Let's make sure I've got the energy to run when it's runnable. And I think that's the difference to Lakeland, where it was runnable, but I just couldn't run. I was shot to pieces. I hadn't eaten and I was falling asleep on my feet. And that combination stopped me doing running at a point which was really runnable.
Yeah, and that's it's one of the things that I've been looking at as well. From, I think, I'm similar to yourself and Richard, looking at the process of how to speed up and what else there is to work on, and what's going to make a real difference. And I completely agree with what you've been saying about sort of staying within yourself, which is what I was doing on the spine up to the point where I got injured, and in doing so, I ate more during that time while I was running than I've ever eaten in a race before. And actually, even after I pulled out due to injury, sort of energy and everything else was completely fine. I mean, by the time I got home, I'd been on the go. So I got home Tuesday, late afternoon, early evening. I'd been going since Sunday morning. I'd had 4 hours sleep. And I was completely fine. I didn't even feel massively tired. I went to bed at normal time at like 10 o'clock at night. I wasn't even going to bed at 8 o'clock at night. And it just makes such a huge difference to, I found to my focus. I didn't make a single navigational error in that time because I was that little bit more focused, which again reduces stress because we've all done it where you go up the wrong little track somewhere and then you're really stressed about running back down it and you feel like you've got to try and catch up again. And so you're removing those errors by being that bit more focused is massive. The other thing that I've been thinking about, and this is what I wanted to ask you about as well in relation to your knee pain, is electrolytes. And that I don't know whether this is kind of possible, but I'm starting to think that I sometimes get a level of cramping going on in my legs that isn't painful, if my electrolytes aren't at the right level. And I'm wondering whether it's something along those lines that could be related to some of the knee pain you've been having, and that it sounds like when you're able to eat, you just don't get it at all.
So I think my knee pain has shown up on the MRI was really very much about proper tendonitis, and you can see it very clearly, and the bone bruising you could see very, very clearly. So I think by doing the weights, working the tendons, allowing them to recover, bringing down the inflammation, that's been for me. And honestly, because I'm generally quite chilly, the electrolyte piece, I mean, even in the Arc where I'd made the bad mistake of having a cup of Coke at Land's End when we went to get our legs sorted because of the gorse that we managed to spend a lot of time in, and I found myself after that quite sick and unable to eat and drink. I really wasn't able to drink for more than the odd sip for the last 30-40 miles of the Arc. So I can actually get away with limited food and fluids for a long time. And I suppose, again, being female and you're very tall and I'm probably quite a lot smaller and our surface areas would be quite different, I probably get away without needing the salts and the electrolytes in quite the same way. But certainly for my knees, I think the winner has been doing the weights.
And as you know, I'm a big fan of the weights and the strength exercises as well. And I'm just started a new. It's for me, I don't know, probably a third generation of my weights program that I'm doing now. So yeah, I was quite interested to ask you just about what are the sort of 1 or 2 or 3 of specific exercises that you think are making the biggest difference?
The ones that hurt the most, and therefore by definition I think must be making some difference, are the split squats with heavy weights. There's also a deadlift with heavy weights, and I think the other one that's making a big difference is the heel raises. So making sure calves are strong, hamstrings and glutes are strong, and then quads are being properly worked through a proper range. I think between those 3 exercises, that's probably, in terms of the heavy weights, that's probably the key. Yeah. There are lots of other bits and pieces around that, but those are the 3 that I now wouldn't miss. We do single leg deadlifts as well in there as well, but really on top of doing the big heavy deadlift. So I think a lot of runners are just weak through glutes, weak through hamstrings, just weak through that whole posterior, and rely on quads. I'm sure I was one of them, and I think just by working them, it's starting to make a. And I came from a rowing background. I suspect I didn't use any of those muscles as much as I could have done. I was probably very quad dominant, and I think probably over time my knees have just taken all of it, and now it's much more balanced. So, and we were always very specific in our training. We do a lot of downhills when we're coming up to a very sort of a race with a lot of ascent and descent. So we're quite focused on that. And I think it helps. But I think historically, by doing those downhills, it also hurt my knees. I used to dread them. It still does to some extent, but at least now doing the weights has taken some of the pain out.
Yeah, no, I thought that's good, and it's the same basis in my strength program as well. Particularly the deadlifts is the one that I spent some time with Simon, the trainer, last week, just making sure that I've got my form right, because I'm now cranking up the weight. So we've got as high as I've got my body weight on the bar.
So you're getting up there.
Getting up there with enough weight that I could hurt myself if I wasn't doing it right. So although I was pretty confident with it already, I think it's always a good time to get somebody to just have a look at how you're doing it, and make sure you've got good form, and again with the squats, heel raises I'm doing a lot of. I've also introduced and I'll probably not get the name of it exactly right. It's a kind of side plank for your hip adductors.
Okay.
Which helps with twisting on the knee by making some of it's kind of like your sideways stepping muscles.
Yeah.
By making those stronger, it reduces twisting on your knee and your ankles, which is something that I had issues from in the spine. So obviously some of it is when you get an injury, it's just bad luck. But I always look at it and think, well, which are the elements that I can work on and try and improve on those. So yeah, been doing quite a lot of that. I'm kind of looking forward to upping the running again, but I'm trying to hold off and focus on the strength for as long as I can. It's just from the point of view of, I'm sure you see something similar, that there's so many hours in the day and so much energy in your body that you can dedicate to training. And at the moment, I'm trying to put the focus into the strength, and yeah.
Well, that probably makes a lot of sense, and certainly as an older female, I think it makes a lot of sense, because as we know, the bone density starts to go down from here on in. So trying to keep it up as much as possible. I mean, as I say, they are my least favorite thing to do, but I'm a huge advocate now, and I will keep doing them. All of that S&C work will continue to be part of every day. So yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah, the other thing that's seems to have come out through your story over the last year, and it kind of relates to something else that we've talked about a lot as well, is the happy runner element of the story. Because as you said right at the start, you're talking about focusing on training with Millie and Bella, and having that focus on somebody else and having the enjoyment in the races and having the time to be able to enjoy the people around you is in the early stages of the race. And I, from what I see and from my experience, I think that's probably contributing a lot to your performances as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's only having a positive mindset and not having those mental gremlins that are constantly bringing you down while you're racing, before you race. I mean, I used to get so nervous and anxious about racing that, there were 5 or 6 years back, Richard just said, right, we're going to race a lot. We're going to race so much that you'll stop worrying about it. Because you'll have done it so often, there won't be anything to worry about anymore. Actually, I still got incredibly nervous and I must have wasted so much energy. And the reality is, for 99% of us, we're doing this because we want to. We're doing it because we like being outside. It's totally irrelevant to anyone bar us where we come, whether we podium or not, what happens. It's all self-imposed pressure. And I think reading the Happy Runner book, and I had been sort of falling over it during the year, but reading it just really crystallized that for me. It's a case of, I'm doing this because I love to be outside. I love these adventures. It's a huge excuse to spend lots of time together as a family, but also with Richard. It's our quality time. And it just changed my perspective, and I took the self pressure off and the self expectation, and I think you're right. I think that particular thing has been probably, I mean, you can call it finding your why, you can call it focusing on the process, not the outcome. There's all sorts of things you can talk about. But ultimately, I think for me, just changing that mindset has been fundamental to a full enjoyment, and probably to some of these results. Because I think in Lakeland, earlier on in that whole process, I would have just given up. I'd have just been like, I may as well just walk from here. I'm not going to do very well. It doesn't really matter. And actually, just having that positive mindset changed that. I'm having fun. I've got some food down. Let's see where we go with this. And I think I have a constant refrain in my head now, probably from the DNS this year as well, which is you can't podium if you don't cross the line. And until we cross the line, we don't know where we're going to come. Because the joy of ultras is everything changes for everyone throughout the course of these events. And 100 miles is always a very long way. So I've really learned not to set any expectation. What's happening at 50 miles may be so different to 75, even to 90. And so I think I've watched pros in races. I've spent lots of time looking at how that pans out for some of them. And yes, sometimes people take the front. And you look at Pau Capel this year in UTMB, he took the front, he went for it, and he stayed at the front, and it was the most amazing run. But it doesn't happen that often. And the fact that everyone picked up on that at the time shows that that's relatively unusual. Actually, often it's people coming through towards the end. It's people either hanging on or falling back, or lots and lots of top people stop. So you don't know what other people's race calendars have been like. You don't know what's going through their heads. And just having that positive, I just want to cross the line and do what I can do, has really, really changed things for me. Partly, and as I say, those DNFs have made a big difference. It's really horrible being forced to stop through illness or injury or whatever it happens to be. So on any occasion where I physically don't have to stop, I don't want to wake up the next day and say, I stopped. I'd rather just grit it out and get the most out of it, be it falling over in mud or getting caught up in gorse, whatever it is, and have some memories than have to look back and go, I could have carried on, but I just chose to stop. There are times when you don't have a choice. That's totally different. But I don't want to be making that choice. So
yeah. So I guess just to plug the previous podcast I did, it means those DNFs did not fail, because we learned lessons from them.
Absolutely.
So,
definitely.
Yeah, because I mean, which is really the key. I think sometimes we need those fail, not completing the race or not hitting the goal that we aimed for, either to bring us back to earth a bit or to learn key lessons. But no, I think the year that you've had, your birthday year, or however you want to phrase it, it's really phenomenal. I was just making extra notes as we've been talking here. So is that let me try and make sure I've got this right here. So 500-mile ultras. So you finished first lady.
Yeah.
And an 83-mile as well. Which, it's so 6 proper long distance ultras in a year. To have those kinds of results is definitely pretty phenomenal. Yeah, I'm not surprised you're happy.
Well, I am. I'm really happy, and I'm really, really enjoying it. I think that's been, now when I head out training, I'm doing it because I actually really want to go. And some are just rubbish, but most of them now are good, and you can find something positive in every run. And I'm, I keep telling myself I'm making this choice to go running, so I may as well get on and enjoy it. And I think the Happy Runner book does make a very good point, which we spend most of our time doing all of this training. And if we spend all of our time thinking about those tiny, small snippets of time where you might be on a podium or you might be crossing a line, actually, that's the huge chunk of your life you'll spend doing the training, and this tiny, tiny amount of time where things may or may not go well. So you better enjoy the huge chunk of time. And maybe I'm now showing my age and time is flying, and you're thinking, crikey, I must make the most of every minute of this. But I certainly think I'm quite focused on enjoying the fact that I do spend many hours a day doing this training, and that is a choice. And I could be sitting on a couch, or I could be watching films, and I'm choosing to do this. So enjoy it while I can. I feel pretty lucky, having moved my career to being a portfolio career, that I can now spend this time. It's the first time I've really been able to do that, and I think that really helps too. So that may well be instrumental. I've just got a bit more time to fit in those extra miles.
Yeah. So do you know roughly either how many hours a week you train or how many miles a week you run?
I think an average week is somewhere between 65 and 80. And it really depends whether there's been some long hikes, whether Richard and I have managed to whiz up to the Lake District and spend a few big days. That's the thing that would tip us up towards the sort of 85 to 100. Generally, if it's just running and in and around home, I'd say it's 65 to 80. Yeah. Which is a chunk of mileage now compared to where I was.
Yeah, it is. It's a good chunk. It's a similar level to what I was hitting training for the Lakeland 100 last year. So I can wrap my head around that. It's when you see people doing 120 miles plus a week, you think, I can't even wrap my head around that. You've got to be full-time training.
I think you've got to be then training twice a day running, and I think you've then got to be so quick that you get those miles in quite quickly, and I'm just not that quick. So I think if you're within...
Sorry, I just lost you for a moment there.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yep. Yes, yeah. You were just saying if you're really quick, maybe you can get that kind of mileage in. I think sometimes as well, it's people that are running a lot of flatter running, maybe hit the higher miles. Obviously, there's a few exceptions that'll run huge mileage uphill, but I think probably a few less.
Yeah, and I don't think they're approaching 50. I think I'll leave that to the younger lot. I think I'd be injured very quickly.
Yep, but no, I mean, I guess really the next thing I was just thinking about is, I think we're all seeing now that the sort of difference in performance between men and women seems to get narrower as we go beyond 100 miles, and I might already know what the answer to this is. So is that what you're looking at next?
Oh, a big one, yeah. So I have put an entry in for the Summer Spine, and I'm really keen to have a go at that. I'm excited because other than going through the night once for the sort of 100 miles where you generally go through one night, I've never had to do multiple nights. Generally, I'm not great on no sleep, as you know from the Lakeland 100. So I think think that's going to be very, very interesting in itself, and I think that needs some sort of strategy, some sort of pacing plan. But I'm really excited to have a go at that, and just see what happens. I mean, great excuse to see a chunk of Britain. So I'm looking forward to that. Also, it's going to be at a sensible pace, so there'll be people to chat to. It looks like a race where there's an awful lot of camaraderie and a lot of sort of participant support for each other, which I'm excited about. Again, I'll be doing it on my own, so I'll have to sort out my own nav, which is good. And between now and June, it means I've got an excuse to go and recce the whole thing as well. So that gives me a bit of purpose for some, fun weekends and fun days out in the British countryside. So yes, I have got my eye on something longer. I don't know how it'll go, and certainly it shouldn't really be squeezed into what is already a massive race calendar. But I'm viewing it as just good time on my feet for other races.
It'll definitely be a lot of time on your feet. That much is for sure. But yeah, as I clarified with you in the last few days, I've also got a place on the summer spine. So you might be able to drag me along a bit, and I'll point you in the right direction. Certainly of the first 120 miles or so, I know very well.
We'll be sharing some good miles, Kev.
Yes,
it's going to be fun.
And hopefully do some recce's together as well.
Oh, that would be excellent. Yes.
But yeah, I know quite a few other people who are doing either the flare, which is the sort of the first 108 miles, or the fusion, who are doing it as their first thing that they're doing in regards to the spine and the Pennine Way, similar to yourself. So I know of a lot of recce's going on. So logistics gets a bit interesting sometimes with it being a long straight line.
Yes.
You need to kind of work out getting cars to each end and people to pick up and drop off and different things. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. So bit of a step up. Guess what's the longest one you've done so far? 105 miles?
Yeah, about 105. So it will be a very, very big step up.
Yeah.
And
so up to 268 is
Oh yeah, it's going to be huge.
Yeah. So as we were chatting the other week, I think the one piece of advice I would give is don't try to treat it like a 100-mile race. It's completely different. And actually, there's a podcast with Simon Roberts, who I ran with for a while. So Simon was, I think, second or third on the Cheviot Goat in December, and then he went onto the spine in January, and he was actually, I think he was actually leading it for a short time early on in the race. And then I met him up at Lothersdale, coming in, as we're getting properly into the first night, and he was feeling it a bit, having gone off a little bit fast. But there's a really good interview with him. I think it's the at the Checkpoint podcast. That'll be interesting, I think, possibly for you to listen to, because he talks about getting surprised by the difference between, an ultra like up to 100 miles where you just do it in one go versus 268 miles where you do need to break it down a little more.
My
I'm sure
research,
you'll be fine.
I'm going to be doing so much research, Kev. Believe me, I will be listening to podcasts, looking at blogs, reading everything I can find. Yeah, no, it's a great adventure to plan for as well. That's the joy of something like this. It gives you a whole new project, so it's going to be great.
Yeah,
really good.
Yeah. So yeah, that's going to be an exciting summer. So you've got the summer spine, the fusion. I believe you also have a place in the Lakeland 100 again.
I do have a place in Lakeland 100. I've got the Centurion Grand Slam in the diary. I've got my place in TDS. And a various number of 50s in there as well. So it's looking pretty packed at the moment.
That is a packed race calendar.
I know. So, there's no chance of A's and B races. I think it's just going to be a case of let's see how they go and see where we are, and make sure that we're in good shape for the spine, and make sure that in good shape for hopefully Lakeland 100 after it. Although who knows? Anything can happen if you pick up an injury. It may not have healed. We'll have to see. But excited to give it a go.
Yeah. Just keep looking after those knees, and you'll be welcomed into the Spine family, because once you get involved with that event, it is a real family atmosphere. So it'll be good.
Well, I'm excited. I have to say, I mean, all of these different ultra running families and communities around the place. I mean, the Mud Crew, a bunch who run Arc of Attrition, are fantastic. I really enjoyed meeting all of them. The Centurion running crew that are all around this area where I live, they're fabulous. And I've made so many new fun ultra running friends through that. So if the Spine's going to add a new bunch, that's great. I can't wait.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess we'll wrap up there. So absolutely amazing year for you, Anna. I've been very happy and privileged to meet you along the way on your journey. So I'll just have to run through it again, because it's such a fantastic list of achievements. So you started off with the Oner at 80 odd miles, and then Wendover Woods 100, Lakeland 100, and then Arc of Attrition. Having walked around Javenlina Jundred and along the way there, and Exodus as well. All those being first female on those. It's phenomenal.
Thank you.
I do think one of the keys to it all is how much you enjoy it, because I think putting yourself under pressure and kind of trying to drive yourself home through all those events, I think would be enough to break people. Whereas if you can go to them all and enjoy all the process of the training and enjoy being at the events, it's just a year-long celebration, isn't it?
It has slightly felt like that. It has been fantastic. Roll on the next one is what I say, Kev. Cross fingers.
Right. Well, thanks very much, Anna.
Thanks so much for having me, Kev. Speak soon.
Yeah,
bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Running Your Stories. Please like the podcast, share it, give us a review, mention us to your friends, follow us on social media, and listen in. We'll have another podcast coming up soon. Thank you.